Welcome to the second week of our message series, Radical Love. Now, while I'm not much of a mushy-gushy guy myself, I do understand where people who love love are coming from. After all, love is exciting, it's poignant, it's positive, and it's moving. And at the same time, love manages to be equally frustrating, elusive, mysterious, and abstract. Love is one of the most universally sought after and universally misunderstood parts of the human experience. And I think that's where love, at least as our culture understands it, gets its appeal. People love a fancy meal. People love a good movie or a moving song. People love a challenging puzzle. And love is the most complex one out there. But love isn't meant to be like that. As much as we long for an ideal, perfect love, our reality is that of a fallen world, and sin is the great complicator. Sin always throws a monkey wrench into what God intended to be simple. Last week, we kicked off this series with the assertion that we, as people, were created to love, not just in spite of the suffering that naturally seems to follow that relationship, but what if we loved because of the suffering? Or to phrase it in another way, perhaps suffering is necessary for love to be true. Maybe, just maybe, sin has warped our expectations of love. Because let's be real, we expect love to be easy and to come naturally. Maybe you started this new job, excited and ambitious, but between your coworkers and the drudgery, you're constantly watching the clock and just doing whatever it takes to get things done so you can hurry up and get home. Maybe you were chomping at the bit to go off to college and to leave home, but the novelty has officially worn off. Between the loneliness and the crazy workload and the craft dinner, and so much craft dinner, even more craft dinner. Maybe you just got married with some high hopes, but recently you've realized that the honeymoon is officially over. And now you're looking at your spouse, and try as you might, you're secretly thinking, I don't think this is what I signed up for. Maybe that is you. But we learn time and time again that relationships and love seem to go hand in hand with hardships and misunderstandings. It can be a disappointment to have it happen. And this disappointment often causes people to drop their expectations extremely low. So much so that it's not really love that they expect anymore, because love, or what they thought love was like, doesn't exist. To which I say, of course love does not exist. Not like that, anyway. Love doesn't go down the way you may wish it did or you expect it to. But it was never meant to be like that in the first place. And so throughout the course of this series, we're talking about what God originally meant for love to look like. To help us dive into this, we're going to take a look at our first reading today from the book of the prophet Samuel. We read, Saul rose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. So to put this into context, Saul was the king of Israel, the very first king of Israel. The prophet Samuel, the human author of the book that we just read from today, had anointed him the king at the request of the Israelite people. Now at first, Saul was a relatively good leader, but as we have all seen, power and prestige can do funny things to people. He quickly became a power-hungry king, vicious and disregarding God's guidance for his leadership. Samuel soon heard in a prophetic moment that God was displeased with Saul, and he had a new leader in mind. Secretly, with God's guidance, Samuel found the young man David and set it up so that David could be close to the king until such a time as Saul stepped down and David could take his position as the next king. Saul was already nervous about maintaining his position because he knew in his heart that he had already lost God's favor. So when he was acquainted with the young, handsome, talented David, he became jealous. Now I'm talking, David was playing his harp for the king, and Saul tried to skewer him with a spear. David fled from the palace after this confrontation and went to the wilderness of Ziph. So at the beginning of today's reading, Saul is sending out a 3,000 men strong search party to track down and dispose of David once and for all. But in the middle of the night, David and his servant Abishai snuck into Saul's encampment. Check this out. There, Saul lay sleeping with the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. Abishai said to David, "Let me pin him to the ground with one stroke of the spear." This is an opportunity some people only dream about. In one fell swoop, David can bring his enemy down right now without even having to break a sweat. It's something that we as people want. Naturally, we want justice to be served. There's a part of us that wants people who have wronged us to get their just deserts, right? Some of you are nodding yes. Oh boy. But if you were presented with such an opportunity, think about it. If you were presented with that kind of an opportunity to get revenge, would you take it? If you found out a compromising secret about that annoying and arrogant coworker, would you tell someone else to bring them down? If you could twist something into a harmful rumor and spread it about that one friend who continues to insult you, would you spread that piece of gossip? If your spouse confronted you with something they wanted you to do better in, would you bring up that one problem that they've been struggling with to make them feel the same shame that you're feeling right now? The truth is ugly. But we all have the capability and the capacity for vengeance. We do it sometimes in big ways, but most of the time in small ways. It comes naturally to us because we all long for justice. The problem is, though, justice is not necessarily an eye for an eye. Justice is about setting things right. And what's right? What's ideal in these situations, in the moments when we have been injured by a loved one? Well, the just thing to do is to reestablish the relationship, to make the wrong right, to cover the insult or the betrayal in understanding, forgiveness, and love. It's unnatural. It doesn't even feel good. And it doesn't feel like it's even working most of the time. But it's right. And it's a hard decision to make. But it's one that David makes. He tells Abishai not to kill the king. Instead, they steal the spear and the king's water jar, and they leave without disturbing anyone. And once he's at a safe distance, David calls out to Saul, waking him up and saying, "Here is the spear, O king. The Lord rewards everyone for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, but I would not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. As your life was precious today in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he rescue me from all tribulation." It isn't easy to live out God's commandment to love our enemies, particularly when those enemies take on the form of our classmates or our friends or our closest family members. But the mercy and love that David showed Saul are the same mercy and love that God shows us. So who are we, the children of God, to withhold that love just because of our feelings? Sometimes going the extra mile to do something we didn't initially want to do can make a huge difference in our lives, and indeed a huge difference in the lives of others. When we go that extra distance with our coworkers, our friends, our neighbors, our children, our parents, our spouse, When we do that, we give that person an opportunity. We give them an opportunity to have an encounter with our merciful and loving God. Showing love to someone who has not shown love to you is one of the most beautiful and effective ways of witnessing to your faith. I know it's hard to do, but it is a beautiful way of witnessing to who you really are and what you believe in. When you do this, when you love your enemies, even when your enemy might be a close loved one, you're taking the opportunity to turn that enemy into an ally and to recruit someone else to distribute love in a very love-starved world. Christ challenges us to do that in the gospel today. He says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. But love your enemies, do good, and expect nothing in return. It is easy to love when you've been loved, right? It is easy to love someone when you have been loved. But it is radical to love someone when you have been hurt. Much tougher, but it is radical. But we don't have a Savior who is unfamiliar with this. Jesus challenges us to do this, but he walks the walk himself, and he takes on that challenge. More often than not, Jesus experienced rejection, hatred, and betrayal. And he let sin and sorrow lead him to the cross, and subsequently to the biggest miracle in all of human history, his resurrection from the dead. And that's the power of love. That's the power of real, radical love. It can take the things in our life that we think are impossible, and it can transform them into victory. It can take a rough relationship, and with a little bit of elbow grease and a whole lot of grace, transform it into a strong and positive relationship. That's been God's plan from the beginning. Love was never meant to just be a nice sentiment, a feeling, or an impossible puzzle. Love was never meant to just be something we celebrate one day of the year with nice cards, warm teddy bears, and pink hearts. Love, true love, was always meant to be radical. True love was always meant to be radical.